Web hosting's been around for about 25 years now, and having been in business in one way or the other most of that time myself, let me tell you, it's always been kind of the Wild West. It's an area where price doesn't necessarily equal value, and there's just all sorts of crazy stuff going on. Plus, it's very technical and hard to understand. So with that said, let's have a look at hosting, and in this specific session, looking specifically at WordPress hosting. Your choice of WordPress hosts can make a rather big difference in the performance of your site, and is something you might have to live with for a long time. So it's definitely worth thinking about it and learning a bit about it in order to make the best decision. So first question really is, what kind of site do you have? And the big question really is whether you want your site for just straightforward marketing, or whether you're going to have enhanced features. The most notable one is whether you're going to make it into an e-commerce site. Typically on WordPress, that's using a plugin called WooCommerce. And that said, for the basic sites, like most sites, including the What Works site, which is performing well right now, a fairly straightforward, decent quality host will work just fine. That said, some of the e-commerce needs require more bandwidth and more processing power. And so if that's the case, you probably want to look at some advanced hosting for your e-commerce site, which I'd be happy to answer questions about that, although that's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. So with the different types of hosting, and again, first, simply put, your host is basically just a computer that's accessible to the internet that your website sits on. It's really not magical. It is just, even if it's a massive server or if it's in the cloud, from a practical perspective, it's just a computer that's sitting out there that's on 24/7, that's always available, that your website is being served from. So you look at the different types. So shared hosting is a situation where you're sharing a server with other companies. And this is the most common type of hosting, and it's the basic type of hosting that you'll probably sign up for if you don't dig in a bit further. Absolutely not recommended. And a couple of reasons for this. One is that all of a sudden you're susceptible to what other websites are doing. So for one, security. If another site gets hacked that's on your server because they're not taking cautions to make sure they don't get hacked, you're all of a sudden vulnerable because you're on the same server with them. Secondly, if they happen to get really busy, you're sharing all the resources on the one server, so your website's going to slow down. Even if you don't have anywhere near as much traffic as they do, you could have a modest amount of traffic, but their busyness is going to kill your performance. So managed hosting is another type of hosting where there's at least some form of performance management to improve how sites are served. Interestingly, and this is where it's kind of buyer beware, managed hosting is positioned as a premium service, but depending how it's structured, it may still be shared at certain price points. Having it managed doesn't necessarily mean it's not shared. Looking a bit further, a VPS is a virtual private server, and basically this means that your site gets its own dedicated resources. So this is a great environment for a lot of companies, but it's overkill for most normal websites and can get quite expensive. So cloud hosting is something that is kind of the way that most places are going. And it allows a little bit of the best of both worlds. It allows instant requisitioning of more bandwidth if your site's getting more traffic. That said, there may still be some performance limitations. So you really want to understand exactly what's being offered. And actually the best thing is going with a host that somebody recommends that they've had a really good experience with, and then actually testing the performance of that host before you go all in. We also do actually have some advice on how to test that we'll get into in our lessons as well. So your basic options when you do hosting is there's domain registration. That's where you sign up for your domain. So in our case, whatworks.marketing is our domain. That sometimes is bundled in with a website or website hosting. You typically want to keep that separate on its own registrar. And then email services is another one that's often bundled in. Most of the dedicated WordPress hosts do not offer email services on the same host, and there's some great reasons for this in terms of performance and capabilities and just keeping things separate. It's also usually best if you leave your email services separate from your host, because the way it often works, your email services are kind of permanent. You want to leave, it's a real pain to move your email services, so you kind of want to pick somewhere where you can leave your email services indefinitely. Although from personal experience, I can tell you that hosts for websites, they go up and down, and a host that's a great 1 year may stink the next year. You want to keep your website hosting kind of portable. So you want to make it so it's not too difficult to move your hosting. So that's another reason why it's great to separate your hosting from your email. And we do talk about email and services in the email lesson as well. Some basic things: beware of first year discounts. There's one of the large hosts that is not the top performance host by any means. They're well known, and they have what I consider to be a brutal practice of just making it super attractive with first year discounts to lure people in, and then the price is literally double in the second year. So if you're comparison shopping and basing it on the first year discounts, you're probably not really doing yourself any favors. That said, nothing wrong with discounts, and if a host like that ends up being the one that you choose, that's great to save some money. But as a marketing tool, it can be kind of brutal the way they do that. Good to note that WordPress sites basically need WordPress specific hosting. So in theory, WordPress can be installed on most any host, but if you want decent performance, you want a host that has a service that has been configured specifically for WordPress to help it run fast and trouble-free. And there's just a whole host of things that you're going to have challenges with if you don't go with a WordPress specific host. Typically they have WordPress hosting right in their service name, so that's kind of easy to figure out. Digging a bit further, some features that you want to look at are caching, which is where basically copies of your content is saved so it can be delivered quite quickly. A content delivery network, often with hosts, they'll store the files for the website, but for the images and the media and all that sort of stuff, they go out on these content delivery networks because they're the biggest assets on the sites, and they go out on these content delivery networks that are essentially content hosts that deliver them much more quickly. So that really helps with site speed and is a built-in option with a lot of WordPress specific hosts now. SSL, which stands for Secure Socket Layer, basically ensures that your site is secure and that the connection is to the domain. There's a big technical explanation that I won't get into, but essentially that's pretty much mandatory now. Some hosts still charge separately for that, so you want to watch out for that. You want the SSL included in your hosting. A lot of the better hosts have additional security baked into their hosting. Another thing is backups and restoration. The host that we use has daily backups that it keeps for 30 days, and it has one-click restoration of that. So for instance, if today I found out that our site crashed, possibly because somebody updated a plugin or something like that, I could actually just go and say, okay, well, we haven't made any changes for a week, so I'm going to dial back a week and just literally click the restore button next to last week's or 7 days ago backup, and within minutes the site is restored fully and is working again. So those are really important features to look at. There's some other ones like having a staging site accessible, and that's where the host allows you to keep a second version of your site that you can make changes to without them going public. And if you're doing some an ambitious overhaul of your site, that's a great feature, because you can do some experimentation. If it doesn't work or if it's looking ugly for a while, it really doesn't matter because nobody can see it. And then at the point where you've finished your changes on your staging site and you're happy with it, you just then publish that and it will then overwrite the main site. So that's another great feature that I've mentioned there. So I don't want to sound negative or anything, but the hosting industry is brutal. It is very much buyer beware. There are some extremely low quality offerings out there. You can pay as little as you like for hosting. Like if you want to pay $1.99 a month for your hosting, you'll find a host that offers that. it's just going to be very low quality. Also, some vendors don't include important elements. They're misleading about performance. Another thing, there's the saying that you get what you pay for. In hosting, you have to pay a certain amount to get decent quality, but you don't necessarily get what you pay for, because there are lots of hosts that just charge dramatically more, and kind of they know that people don't really understand how hosting works, so they wrap it up like it is a much better offering, when really it might not even be as good as lower priced offerings. Another one that is absolutely brutal, something to watch out for, is that all the online posts about, the 5 best WordPress hosts, and even some of the companies that, some of the trusted companies are actually affiliates for these hosts, which means that they get money when you purchase the hosting. So there are both misleading reviews and reviews that are outright lies. I actually looked at the first 4 or 5 review posts that came up in Google about hosting, and they were all just garbage. They were totally misleading. I saw some hosts that I know to be absolutely brutal included on some of the reviews, even by organizations that you would think you could trust. So got to be really careful there. So with that said, I will offer a few recommendations about hosts. I want to do it with the full disclosure. We do offer, we do resell services of one of the hosts because we like them. So I think you should absolutely make up your own mind and do your own research. And so with my potential bias there, I will share some experience. And I have worked on all these hosts, and we as a company. So the recommendations, if you are on a very low budget, you're really looking to save some money, SiteGround is the best budget host I've found. It costs typically just a few dollars a month, maybe no more than $5 a month, and it's pretty decent for that price. That said, if your site's important, which it probably is, I don't necessarily recommend going with the cheapest host, but again, if price is a huge consideration, SiteGround is quite good. Flywheel is actually the host that we resell. Came across them a few years ago when we were having just nightmares with a couple of other hosts, and we wanted to aggregate all the websites that we did under one host. So that's what we did. We signed up for them. They've been wonderful. They have fantastic support. They are what I'd call a mid-range option, kind of more in the $20 to $25 a month range, but worth absolutely every penny. If you're interested in them, definitely go directly and have a look. We do, again, I mentioned we do resell their hosting. I'm not pitching it here. I'm here to educate, so I'm not gonna force the issue there. But we usually offer it a little bit cheaper than what's published on their website. So love to hear from you if you're interested. WP Engine is an interesting one in that they actually have bought Flywheel, but yet they are a totally separate hosting platform. WP Engine is where we have been moving any big e-commerce sites. So we have some smaller e-commerce sites on Flywheel. We love it for that. All our basic sites, including the What Works site and some other company sites we have, are on Flywheel. But for any significant e-commerce sites, we move them onto WP Engine for some extra horsepower. It's sort of a next step up in pricing. It's kind of closer to around $40 a month for most of the options. I do include GoDaddy on here. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with GoDaddy. These are just my opinions, by the way. But over the years, they have proven to be an excellent place to register all the domains that we keep. They're wonderful on that front. So all the website URLs, that's the only place I'll go with them because they're very responsible and responsive and great with that. That said, they wouldn't be my top choice in hosting unless you absolutely need to have your email wrapped into the hosting. In that case, they do have options of Microsoft's 365, which also not my favorite email system, but if you do absolutely need your email on the same place as your host, they're not a bad recommendation. So with all that said, hopefully this has been some help, and I look forward to any questions about this. We will happily answer them.